Hi folks, thanks for joining us. We have a little talk show that we call Money Talks, and we are here to answer many of your questions about just day-to-day things that come up that a lot of people just don't know where to turn. Well, we've got all the answers here. Our show is called Money Talks, and my guests are from Finer Wealth Management, Michael Finer, Gary Kuhn. Thanks so much for coming.
Great to be here.
In the past, we've talked about the ways people can save their money. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how people need to spend their money, and one of them is planning for elder care. I mean, I am the luckiest person in the world, as you both know. My mom, Myrna Billion, who's watching, I'm sure, is 100 years old.
Wow.
It's that, well, actually, I shouldn't say she's 100. I've gone back to counting her age in months. So she's 1,204 months old.
Wow.
Which is amazing, right? And we are so lucky because we're together. She lives with me, and I take care of her. And it's a wonderful situation for us. But not everybody is that lucky. And there are basic things that I have found out. Nobody, and I keep saying over and over, nobody taught us, nobody told us. So let's take this opportunity to educate folks. What's the first thing that you need to do when you're planning either for your spouse, your parents, yourself? Where do you start?
I think the first thing is to actually develop a plan. So I think most people don't really develop a plan because it's a very difficult situation to deal with people as they become elderly.
Right.
Right. No one wants to talk about it, and usually most of the solutions are not that enticing. But I think it's critical to think about a plan and how you're going to not only care for a person, but how you're going to fund caring for a person. And you know, there are a lot of different solutions. You're very generous that you can help your mother, but it's still not inexpensive to help anyone, especially a centenarian.
Right.
And it's amazing just the cost of doing that. But
And
I
there
think
are so many costs that you don't even think about.
right, an elder care plan is step one. How do you develop that? Who's involved with it? How do you go about it?
And I'll have to answer those things that you just said.
Yes.
Who's involved? How do you go about it? Where do you start? Gary?
One of the things that surprises people today is the studies show that a 65-year-old couple retiring today can expect to spend about $250,000 in out-of-pocket medical expenses that are not reimbursed.
I know, who has that
And
money
it's,
just
it,
sitting
it can
around?
be daunting, to even look at that. So, but retirement is also very different today. The idea of retiring at 60 or 65 from your traditional full-time job and that's you're done is not what a lot of people are doing today, and in part, because of those kinds of expenses. So you're seeing a lot of people extended retirement. They're working part-time. They're becoming entrepreneurial. They're doing some things that are not what you might have seen 20 or 30 years ago.
You're trying to make money. Like you
Exactly.
said, look at me. I'm a perfect example of this. You retire from your job, but you still need to make money. And you still have expenses, and in my case, as I said, my mom. So the first thing that you have to do is figure out what you want for your senior years, and then what it's going to cost. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Come out with those goals. You have to assume today, if you're reasonably healthy, you might know family history, what you're feeling your health is. The chances are with medical technology, you're going to live a lot longer.
And need more money.
And need to plan for that. So what we do is actually come up with that kind of might be a 30-year or more game plan, and then sort of like, well, what do I want to do? And then another thing we've noticed is that we have the what ifs that sometimes people don't think about. If they have children, if you have 3 or 4 children, there is a reasonable likelihood, in addition to you have weddings and things like that come up. Those are goals that maybe if you want to help with those events in some way, or grandchildren, et cetera, education, you can kind of plan those scenarios out. A lot of times we find that there are unexpected things that come up. You might have a son or daughter that loses a job, and you want to be in a position to help in some way. Well, that's not something that you necessarily plan for in retirement, but we see it a lot. So it's something that you need to think about and have contingency plans.
Can we talk about reverse mortgages for a minute? A lot of people think that they sound like the, panacea. Just a great idea for getting all the money that they needed. Just first, I guess what we ought to do is define what a reverse mortgage is, Michael.
Yeah, a reverse mortgage is basically where a bank takes possession of the title of your house, or at least will have the right to sell your house, and they provide you with money in advance of selling the house.
Sounds
So
great.
it can sound great, and it is a potential tool in the toolbox in the
For
right
some people it
in the right
works.
circumstances.
But more often than not, it's a disaster.
It can be very expensive. There are a lot of fees involved with it, and it's based on sort of actuarial lifespan, so it depends on your situation. But most people we found it's just very expensive, and there are a lot of ways that you can fund things
So it's
other
not
than that.
Right. It's not as simple as being able to live at your house and they pay you still.
No, they give you a fixed amount of money, I mean, in the sense of, what you can get out, and you can live in your house until death, but you may not get sufficient money out for all of your living expenses or the real value of the house. So you really have to look at it deeply and understand the cost of it like anything else.
So if that's an option, make sure, folks, you understand exactly what you're doing and talk to more than one person about it for sure. And please, I'm begging you, don't just call an 800 number because you saw it on television or you read it in a magazine and it looked like a great idea, because those are the ones that are usually absolutely not a good idea. So it's my consumer self
Yeah.
busting out. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's good advice.
Yeah. And so Gary, so you have to figure out the best ways to protect your income. You guys know I work with Rubino and Lang, and their slogan is just don't lose the money.
Right.
Just don't lose the money. And you have to figure out how to take what you have and work it to your best advantage.
Yeah, you might be shifting from more of a growth strategy, for instance, on your investments, to a more conservative approach where you're thinking more about income. Because now if you're retiring, for example, if to live the similar lifestyle, you may need some more money from your investments if you've saved some money over time. So you may need to work into that budget a certain amount a month that maybe is coming out from income on your portfolio.
Yeah.
So it's a different kind of an approach, and so that's just in terms of your day-to-day planning and the profile of your investments. That's likely going to be adjusted.
And it sounds like that's the key. I mean, that's really the key to good financial planning. Just take a look at where you are now, how long you're going to work, what your income is going to be once you're no longer working, what you want your lifestyle to be. And lifestyle is that means something different to different people. And once you have those things answered, then you can sort of back into how much money you're going to need and how to get it.
Yeah, and there are definite phases. So the old retirement paradigm, as Gary mentioned, of retire at 65 with your gold watch, really doesn't resonate anymore.
I got a very nice bracelet.
It is
nice
gold. It's
bracelet.
beautiful. When that sort of paradigm happened in Social Security, you retired at 65, people maybe lived 5, 6, or 7 years after retirement. Lifespan was 71 or 72. With lifespans, going into the late 80s on average or into the 90s, I look at it as retirement is sort of your first phase where you reduce probably your active working years at 65 or 65-ish. And then 85 is your actual elder retirement. That's going to be the time where you probably can't work anymore. And it's going to be the time where your health care and elder care costs are probably going to ramp up very significantly. So you sort of have, if you live to 100, like your mom, you have that first 20 years, 65 to 85, where you may be doing some earning, but your health care costs and other costs may not be exorbitant. But by 85, it's really hard not to have health care costs at an exorbitant level, or that you need some assistance. So there's really an inflection point for elders and at retirement that you're not going to treat someone who's 85 or 65 the same way in their financial plan. and whatnot. So those two very interesting time horizons.
And it's never too soon to start planning. That would be the other thing that I would advise people. Be thinking about it. You know, you're young, you're in your 30s, you think, what am I worried about? And then all of a sudden, boom, you're, like you said, 65, and there's plenty to be worried about.
Time flies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
really
if not
does.
for you, for your parents. But it is a tough conversation for people to have, no question.
It's an impossible conversation, especially if, let's say you don't have long-term care insurance, or two spouses living together where they want to live together. Once you're down to one parent, one spouse, one aunt, uncle, whoever you're taking care of, who is going to be in charge of that?
Right.
Who is going to pay for it? And a lot of it isn't just the money, it's the time that you have to devote to someone who's 85 or older is probably more needy than an infant in many ways. So it's like having a child, and you almost need full-time care one way or the other from someone.
No, it's true. I mean, it's true. And I sort of wish my mom was here for a number of reasons. One, so that everybody could see how wonderful she is, how great she's doing. But she speaks eloquently about things that that she needs help with. I mean, at 100 years old, she's driving, and she's not driving. Just a joke.
Wow.
But I'll tell you what, she did drive until she was 98, convertible. as
I
you both
remember.
know.
I
Yes,
remember. It was
I know.
Yeah.
Can I just
Guinness
slip in?
book. Is that a Guinness book?
No, I don't think it is. Unfortunately, it's not. But what we used to do, everybody would say, "Is she a good driver?" And it's really hard because nobody wants to be the one to say to a parent, "You're not driving anymore," and no parent wants their kids sitting next to them to see how well they drive. So what we used to do? What I used to do is I used to follow her when she didn't know I was following her. Sorry, Mom. Actually, I've told her that I did that now because I knew her routine, and
Yeah.
I knew on certain days she was going certain places, and I would just arrange to follow her to see how well she drove. And I have to say she did. But the point that I'm trying to make is that as good as she is and as social as she is, she's out to lunch today and playing mahjong with her friends. When she's home alone, which she's not because I'm there, she can't make her own meals. She no longer can really manipulate the microwave. It's hard to see the numbers. I mean, and there aren't microwaves that are made for seniors. And so you mentioned in some ways, Gary, it's worse or it's harder than having an infant. And that's true because there's certain expectations with infants that you have to do things for them. But seniors, you forget that they are losing their ability to do certain things. I mean, I could go on and on about it.
I think you're right that you have to prepare yourself, your mental attitude, to understand that because generally healthcare is so good and lifespan is so much better, that not only are we healthier going into our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s generally, but that when we do a financial plan for someone who's very young, we actually have a conversation to say, what happens if this person lives to 120 or 110? Who would have thought when I first started that I would never think of anyone living to 100. Now people routinely live to 100. My own grandmother is in her 90s, God bless her, and we have all the same issues, of how do you deal with that stuff?
Yeah. Let's segue into estate planning and the other side of this coin, which is, making sure that everybody is taken care of. It seems amorphous. The topic is huge. So where do you start there?
Well, this is going to be the biggest transfer of wealth in all of history, in the sense of the generation that's passing away now is the wealthiest generation that we've had in American history. And they're living longer, accumulating more money, and there are several issues that we have to consider. One is you need estate planning documents to direct what's going to happen with your assets.
In other words, you've got to write it down.
You do have to write it down.
If you're specific.
If you're a young family and have 2 kids and something, God forbid, happens to you, it's part of estate planning to decide who is going to raise those 2 kids. Mm-hmm. I had a client where both people died, unfortunately, in the same car accident with reasonably young children. And it unfortunately went down to the will and different documents to raise those children. And that's sort of on that end. On the other end, if you've accumulated a lot of assets, there is estate tax. In Massachusetts, there's estate tax after the first $1 million of assets for
Don't need to
Massachusetts. And for federal, it's more like 5.4 million. But if you do have a substantial amount of assets, it's a consideration to think about the estate tax. But I think more importantly, almost like the elder care theme, you just have to have an estate plan to decide what happens. Because like everything else, even if someone passes away, the last thing you want to be thinking about the moment someone passes away is, how are we paying for the funeral? How are you dealing with where do you want to do the funeral? Where am I going to be buried? Do we have a plot? Most people are dealing with that at the worst time, which is during the death, even if the person is older. And that is not only stressful, but can provide a lot of disharmony in the family. I've seen families fight over which cemetery we're going to bury someone at, and that's such an easy thing to solve.
But people don't want to talk about
They
it.
don't.
Nobody wants to talk about that. Hi, come on over for dinner. We want to talk about when you
Right.
die. I mean, it's hard.
It is hard, and that's why I think you have to probably involve some sort of professional who can help you through the topics and not make it seem as grim.
It's grim.
It is grim.
You
It's
can't
not a
dress it
happy.
up. It's
You can
grim.
dress it a little bit. I mean, you can dress it a little
Well,
bit
you
and
can
try
empower
to.
people.
Yeah, because I mean, you can empower people to feel, hey, we're talking about this because you want to plan for the next generation or the next 2 generations, even down to I'd like to have someone have specific keepsakes or jewelry. It's not all just about money. It's about things. Sometimes, you want to see a legacy for the family go on, and how do you transmit all of the things, small or large, to the next generation can be empowering to talk about.
Yeah, and you want to make sure that what you have goes where you want it to go. I mean, so what I hear you saying is the first thing, again, like always, get a professional. Talk to somebody, talk early. I mean, and I know that it's sort of challenging, but you can change your mind. You can do a will, for example, today, and right, Gary? I mean,
I think if you think of this topic, as you said, nobody wants to really think about it or talk about it.
yeah.
But if you think of it in the context of a complete financial plan,
Mm-hmm.
and we talk about sort of life cycle planning, where we've got all the issues that we've talked about in some of our different shows, whether it has to do with education, whether it has to do with the divorce planning, whether it has to do with retirement and making your way through maybe a longer retirement, and estate issues. If you really think of those topics as, okay, I'm just not going to think about just this one, but it's part of an overall comprehensive financial plan, we can hit that topic there and help you work through it. And as you said, we can see you again in 6 months, or see you, in a year, or have some kind of a schedule, because things do change. And then if the unforeseen happens, okay, we need to obviously address it.
Right, if Aunt Frances decides that she's no longer talking, to Cousin Sadie, then she can get her in or out of the will as quickly as she wants to. I mean, that's all easily done, right?
And Mike deals with more of the estate planning issues, but I wonder if you want to maybe talk about the wills versus other kinds of estate options that people have.
Right.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there's a will, which generally covers all of your personal assets that aren't in trusts. And a will can be changed at any time, so long as you're capable mentally and able to. And then you have, a revocable trust that you can set up, which you can put your assets in during your lifetime, which will provide instructions to a trustee, so that when you do pass, it's very simple to move those assets directly to whoever you intend to. The only more complicated piece are the irrevocable trusts. So you can gift some things away for estate planning purposes and to save tax into an irrevocable trust that also provides instructions and other things. But once you do it irrevocably, just like the word sounds,
Right,
you
that's
can't
done.
change that piece. That does require more of a professional, and not that they all don't, but that piece is a little bit more complex.
Right.
But definitely considering all the pieces, and even with that, basic things. My mother recently had hip replacement, and I feel embarrassed to even say this. I showed up at the hospital with the healthcare proxy and durable powers of attorney and all the documents you need when a person goes into the hospital if something should happen. And one of them was an actual copy, just a copy. It wasn't the actual original. And they sent me packing. I had to go back to my office and had me get an original. Now that was,
I don't think of that.
right. It was. Luckily, we had all the documents, and I was close. And luckily, that was elective surgery. But these small things you have to really think about from an estate planning perspective too. That it's not just wills and trusts. It could be healthcare proxies, durable powers of attorney to help someone with their finances, all the pieces. In every hospital that you may go to may have a different take of what you need. So you really
Really?
need,
It's
sure.
not, there's no state or federal law that says what
There
you
are
need?
state
I
and
mean,
federal laws, but sometimes they don't like the language or the format that the attorney put it in. There's no necessarily, standard form. They have their own form sometimes, so you have to sort of pre-plan that if a loved one may be going in for a medical procedure, that you have all the documents that particular organization will accept.
Well, that's
Because the
a
last
question I
time
want to ask early.
you do. So it goes much deeper into not even super long-term planning, but how do you deal with issues relating to health as you get older and whatnot, and to make sure you have all, not even just the right people designated, but just to make sure you have the current documents. And hopefully over time it'll get more digital and more standardized, and this won't be as much of an issue, but
And I'll
it is.
become even more alienated. Then more of us won't even get
It'll
it.
be an iPhone app. You'll go to the hospital, they'll scan it and say, okay, your healthcare
you're good.
proxy, all your instructions are good, and your medical history is on your chip or something, so your iWatch.
Well, the definition of family has changed so much too, that more and more I've read the grandparents are raising, the kids, their grandchildren, and those are all things that I don't think a lot of people think about.
No, you're right, and we've seen, grandparents obviously raising grandchildren. You've seen same-sex couples raising children or grandchildren at this point. We also see grandchildren taking care of grandparents. I've seen some of that at this point because
Yes.
grandparents are so much older. For grandparents in the 90s, 100, the grandchildren could be 30s, 40s,
They're
50s.
older, too.
They're so much. The grandchildren are hauling
Yeah.
the great-grandchild to take care of the grandparent. Sometimes it's an amazing evolution of multiple generations and whatnot. But most importantly, Gary's point, I think one of the biggest points even in an estate plan is to consider that it's probably going to cost $200,000 to $300,000 in out-of-pocket medical expenses to deal with all of these issues, and that is one of the most daunting issues for people who are in later stages of life.
I think it is the most daunting issue. I think people are generally concerned about how am I going to live? How's it going to work?
Yeah, and people make decisions about which medications they will take based on the co-pays, the out-of-pockets. Sometimes, the coverages just aren't there.
And their health, deteriorates because they make bad decisions based, unfortunately, on finances when it comes to their medication.
Yeah, and this is part of, as Gary mentioned on Lifecycle, it's part of the end-of-life. Because when you look at elder care, estate planning, it's sort of the end-of-life planning, that final cycle. And you have, obviously, the birth cycle and retirement cycle, but the end-of-life cycle has become so much more complex.
And nobody really, as I always say, prepared us for it. For our parents, or for us dealing with our parents, or for us dealing, with our futures. And it's all, like you said, it's based, there's a couple of factors. People are living longer, and they have more money. A lot of people have more money.
Yeah, and I think, it has become more difficult as people have had less children too. There's
Fewer
less
children to take
fewer
care of
children to
They
take
don't
care
live,
of.
they don't live near where their children
Yeah.
are, or the parents, people
Yeah.
are scattered about the country. They may
Right.
not live in the same area that they used to.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting that, it used to be nursing homes. Everybody used to say, I want to go to a nursing home. Nursing homes, there are no nursing homes anymore. There are communities. There's assisted living. There are wonderful options.
Well, even as you know best, I'm amazed by all of the communities that are turning up to be retirement communities, the
Yes.
over 55s.
Yes,
that,
exactly.
right?
And they're great.
They're amazing. I mean, I'd like,
Especially one at the Cape.
yeah,
Southport.
yeah.
No.
It is amazing that the world is changing a bit to realize once you leave the suburbs, let's say, and you've raised your children, you might go to first a retirement community from, say, 55 to 75. Then it may be to
Right.
assisted living
Right.
from 75 till 85. And then,
My goal, by the way, is to get those people all talking to each other. Truly.
yeah,
Because that's what needs to happen.
yeah.
So that it is a normal transition from one to the other.
And people are starting to consider their end-of-life cycle in that way, that it used to be an over 55 community, kind of had maybe a negative connotation 20 years ago. Now they're sort of like Disney World. People can't wait to go into these beautiful places. And even assisted living didn't have a good connotation a few years ago, and now they're absolutely, they're amazing. And you sort of, people plan for that cycle now, the assisted living cycle, as opposed to, okay, you're retired, we don't know what happens in between, and then you're in a nursing home. And now a nursing home, not only are they more sophisticated for rehabilitation, but they are truly meant for just that final
Stage. of
stage.
life, yeah.
And who knows what smart people will figure out more pieces, in between that. But financially, that's very expensive.
It's all very expensive.
You know,
yeah. And if
it's
you want to
all-
stay home, it's even more expensive.
Absolutely.
So you really need to plan for these things. And we need to go back, because I really want the message that if people don't remember one other thing that we said today, I think the most important thing is you got to be talking about it in the family, to each other, and to the experts. Nobody wants to talk about it.
No, and those who want to talk about it, many other family members simply don't want to listen because they just don't want to participate, and that's usually the hardest problem, of getting people engaged in the conversation.
Well, I don't remember which one of you, Gary, I think you said it. Old people don't want to go live where they see other old people. I mean, they don't want to be living in a situation where they're reminded constantly that they have disabilities. And so the key, as far as I'm concerned, is to get talking about it early enough so that that whole stigma is completely erased. You don't have to deal with it.
Absolutely. I
I
mean,
feel like I'm in therapy.
Well,
It's
communication and
Yeah, it's
sharing
talking.
information, is very
Yeah.
important.
no, it is a big. It is a big issue as to selecting where you go next and who you want to be around, and is that enticing, and how you best do it.
And I don't think people have a clue. All of a sudden they're not dealing with it, and then all of a sudden they have to deal with it, and they don't know who to call, they don't know where to go.
The good news is that there are a lot more options,
Yeah.
right? So if you do share that information, people might be pleasantly surprised at the options that are out there now, and our entrepreneurs are coming up with more all the time, which is great.
But again, comes back to talking to your family and to experts.
And with trying to create a plan, and the plan never completely works. It's not something that will work in all circumstances, but at least having something, knowing what might happen, what the plan is somewhat consoling to some degree.
I mean, it gives you some security. I mean, and that's what people are looking for. People just want to be comfortable in their later years, knowing it's all going to be fine. Nobody's going to make them live someplace they don't want to live. They're not going to be in the street, I mean, it's a time when you just want to have the comfort of peace of mind, and that's a huge comfort. In our last minute or so, anything you guys want to We're going to, of course, live forever. And we know that. We're good on that. But anything you want to add before we say goodbye?
Any thoughts?
Well, I think, wrapping all of this is that when you do the plan, you've got to look at your investment and financial plan to take all of this, as Gary mentioned earlier and we've discussed, into consideration. How are you going to plan? How are you going to fund things? What your portfolio may look like in your 20s as it grows versus, at this point of time. Is start young and think about the different phases and work your investments and plan, with it, and it'll help.
Gary?
And have a vision for what you want to do. Like we talked about earlier, that you have those goals, your vision of your retirement and your life and the different stages. Share that. When we're putting together plans, it's good to know what that is, not just tomorrow, but plan it out. And then on the flip side of that, there's always the unforeseen. So planning for those possibilities of the unforeseen, as I mentioned, where you have maybe a family member that needs something that you didn't expect, et cetera. So that's helpful too in a plan.
You guys are great. Got to
Thank
start
you.
talking about it like you just did. Gary Kuhn, Mike Feiner from Feiner Wealth Management. Thanks so much to all of you. We hope we've enlightened you a little bit. We appreciate you joining us. See you next time.